In a chamber carved from luminous crystal and suspended high above the blue curve of Earth, hundreds of diplomats sat in perfect silence while the Interstellar Council debated mineral tariffs with the emotional intensity of sleeping statues. The air smelled faintly of sterilized ozone. Every word was translated into 12 languages before it even reached an ear. Even blinking too often could be interpreted as disrespect. Commander Elias Ward blinked anyway. He had been awake for 22 hours, surviving on synthetic coffee and the vague hope that someone would eventually say something interesting. Humans were still new to the galactic stage, and apparently the price of admission was sitting through meetings that made watching paint dry look like a competitive sport. Across the circular chamber sat Princess Lyriel Vaetorin, heir to the Aurelian Imperium, a civilization so disciplined that their military manuals were rumored to be written in poetry. She had the posture of a drawn blade and the composure of someone who had never once spilled a drink in her life. Her silver-toned skin caught the chamber light like brushed metal, and a faint halo shimmered behind her shoulders, not decoration, but a biological field that intensified when Aurelians experienced strong emotion. At the moment, it was completely still. Because Aurelians did not display emotion. Ever. The ambassador from Kethra droned on about strategic patience and mutually beneficial extraction frameworks. And Elias felt his soul attempt to leave his body. He noticed the princess watching the speaker with the kind of focused stillness predators used before striking. She had been like that for hours, alert, flawless, unreachable. On impulse born from catastrophic boredom, Elias slid a small note across the polished diplomatic table. Physical notes were archaic, but Aurelians respected old customs. The paper stopped precisely beside her hand. She glanced down. He had written, "If he says strategic patience one more time, I'm opening the nearest airlock and claiming it was a cultural misunderstanding." For half a second, nothing happened. Then her shoulders trembled. Barely. Her hand rose to her mouth. The halo flickered. And before the universe could stop her, Princess Lyriel laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't undignified. But it was unmistakably real, a warm, startled sound that cut through the chamber like a dropped glass. Every head turned. The Kethran ambassador froze mid-sentence. Somewhere, a translator device emitted a panicked chirp. Aurelian guards snapped upright with the synchronized precision of machines. Elias felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. The princess went perfectly still again, but it was too late. Emotion had been displayed in a formal summit. Protocol had been broken. A thin, robed figure rose from the Aurelian delegation. High Chancellor Sarath looked as if he had been assembled entirely from angles and disapproval. "Princess," he said, voice echoing unnaturally, "you have exhibited uncontrolled emotional response during sovereign proceedings." She inclined her head once. "I have." No excuses? No deflection. Elias leaned toward the human ambassador beside him. "How bad is that?" The ambassador whispered without moving his lips. "Imagine a royal guard juggling chainsaws during a coronation." "Oh. Good. That bad?" The Chancellor continued. "By the concord of civilizations, when a royal breaches diplomatic conduct, the offended party must determine restorative terms." 100 gazes slowly rotated toward Elias. He pointed at himself. "I'm the offended party?" "You initiated the disruption," Sarath replied. "That was a joke. The law does not categorize humor as exemption." He stood halfway out of his chair. "Look, no harm done." She laughed. "Honestly, it improved the meeting." No one else appeared to agree. The princess turned her gaze on him then, calm, searching, unsettlingly direct. "Commander Ward," she said, "Aurelians accept responsibility without resistance. You may name the corrective measure." He opened his mouth. Closed it. This was ridiculous. Humanity had barely joined the interstellar community, and now he was apparently disciplining royalty. "Does it have to be formal?" he asked. "Yes." His brain, tragically, chose that moment to lean into sarcasm. "Well," he said, shrugging, On Earth, if a princess embarrassed you in public, she'd probably have to marry you to make it right. A few human aides snorted before immediately pretending they hadn't. Silence followed. Not normal silence. Vacuum silence. The princess's translator chimed. Binding marital claim detected. It announced in a cheerful neutral tone. Elias blinked. I'm sorry, what? High Chancellor Serras straightened, robes whispering across the floor. Under Aurelian Prime Law, he declared, the acceptance of personal accountability through union constitutes the highest form of restorative honor. The claim is recognized. The chamber erupted, not in noise, but in frantic murmurs across a dozen frequencies. Elias laughed weakly. Hold on. No. That was a figure of speech. A joke. Humans do that. Frequently. It's how we cope with everything. The translator does not interpret intent, Serras said. Only declaration. He turned to the princess. Do you accept responsibility through union? Every muscle in Elias's body locked. Princess Lyriel studied him with unnerving calm, as though calculating stellar trajectories. I do, she said. That was it. No hesitation. No drama. Just acceptance. Engagement is hereby affirmed, the Chancellor announced. Elias sat down very slowly. I accidentally proposed to an alien princess. The human ambassador patted his shoulder once, already inching his chair away as if political fallout might be contagious. Royal Aurelian guards moved instantly, forming a perimeter around Elias. He raised his hands. Okay, that feels aggressive. It is protective, one guard replied. Harm to the imperial consort constitutes an act of war. Consort? Elias repeated faintly. Across the chamber, the princess rose and approached him. Up close, the faint glow behind her shoulders shimmered with something he could not name. Curiosity, maybe? Commander Ward, she said. Political marriages statistically improve interspecies stability by 42%. He stared. She tilted her head slightly, examining his face with open interest. Also, she added, you are statistically attractive. What? I have reviewed human aesthetic metrics. Please stop reviewing me. Around them, diplomatic aides were already transmitting the news. Somewhere out there, headlines were being born. The princess folded her hands behind her back. We should begin compatibility assessments immediately, she said. I'm still trying to begin breathing. I have prepared a preliminary structure. A slim tablet appeared in her hand as if conjured. 47 points, she continued, including emotional transparency intervals, recreational bonding, and 47? Efficiency prevents relational decay. He pushed a hand through his hair. Princess, with respect, we are not getting married because you laughed at my joke. She regarded him quietly. You would prefer I refuse responsibility? That is not what There are middle options. Very middle. For Aurelians, avoidance signals dishonor. He opened his mouth again, then stopped. There was no mockery in her expression. No royal arrogance. Just certainty. And unexpectedly, anticipation. He tried another angle. What if I withdraw the claim? You may attempt petition, she said. Processing requires only 3 to 6 lunar cycles. Months? Our bureaucracy is considered swift. He slumped back in his chair. She tapped her tablet once, then looked up. Compatibility assessment begins now, she said calmly. Question 1. Do you prefer structured affection or adaptive? I prefer waking up from whatever this is. For the first time since the disaster began, the corner of her mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. But close. Very close. And Elias had the deeply unsettling realization that despite the guards, the scandal, and the fact that he had apparently just become engaged to an empire, part of him was no longer entirely sure he wanted to escape. By the time Elias returned to his diplomatic residence, the entire planet knew he was engaged. Possibly several planets. His communicator wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages stacked faster than he could read them. Unknown number, is it true you seduce royalty with humor? Teach me your methods. Mother, you never call, but you accidentally marry a princess? Earth Media request, interview opportunity, working title. The man who accidentally married an empire. He groaned and dropped the device onto the couch. This is a misunderstanding, he muttered to the empty room. The door chimed. Before he could respond, it opened with silent authority. 3 towering Aurelian royal guards stepped inside, scanning every surface with glowing ocular implants. Behind them came Princess Lyriel. And behind her came luggage. A great deal of luggage. Elias stared. Why does it look like you're moving in? This residence has been designated our temporary cohabitation site, she said. Our what? Shared dwelling increases compatibility outcomes by 31%. One guard crouched beside Elias's coffee table and ran a handheld scanner over his mug. What are you doing? Elias asked. Testing for toxins, the guard replied. It's coffee. Humans willingly ingest toxins. There. Another guard opened his refrigerator with solemn focus. The princess walked slowly through the apartment, observing everything: the crooked stack of books, the jacket thrown over a chair, the faint scorch mark where Elias had once attempted cooking. You live, informally, she noted. It's called relaxing. She touched the back of his couch experimentally, as if expecting it to issue commands. Where is your ceremonial chamber? My what? For mental stillness. I have a television. She considered that. Acceptable. He sank into a chair. Princess Lyriel, you can't just relocate here. She turned toward him. As your betrothed, proximity is logical. I didn't agree to this. You initiated union. I made a joke. She studied him for a moment, then tapped her tablet. Very well. We will proceed to scheduled bonding. You already scheduled it? 0900 hours, emotional transparency session. It is not 0900. I adjusted for travel time. Before he could protest, she sat across from him with perfectly aligned posture. State of formative childhood memory, she said. He blinked. You cannot just open with that. Trust accelerates intimacy. Trust usually starts with something lighter. Like favorite food. She typed rapidly. Amending protocol. Favorite food? Tacos. She paused. Define tacos. 20 minutes later, the princess of the Aurelian Imperium was sitting on a plastic stool beside a street vendor while traffic roared past. Her guards stood in a rigid triangle around the cart, scanning pedestrians as if expecting an uprising. Lyriel held a taco with careful precision. It is leaking, she observed. That's part of the experience. She took a cautious bite. Everything about her froze. Then her eyes widened. The faint halo behind her shoulders shimmered bright silver. This is extraordinary, she whispered. The vendor beamed. Extra sauce? She looked at Elias. More. He laughed. Careful. That's how they get you. She ate another, less carefully this time, sauce dripping onto her fingers. A guard stepped forward with a cloth. She waved him off. I will adapt. Elias leaned back, watching her try something utterly normal with the focus of someone decoding alien scripture. You don't do spontaneous things much, do you? Spontaneity is inefficient, she said, then paused. But pleasurable. They walked through a nearby park afterward. A musician played something soft and wandering on an old guitar. Lyriel slowed. No one announced this performance, she said. Nope. People simply gathered. Sometimes humans do things just because they want to. She listened for a long moment. My life has been scheduled in 5-minute increments since infancy, she said quietly. Even laughter was allocated. He glanced sideways at her. That sounds exhausting. It is stable. Stable isn't always the same as living. She didn't answer, but she stepped closer, near enough that their arms brushed once before she adjusted, almost self-conscious. Later, as they crossed the street, a ground car turned too quickly around the corner. Elias grabbed her elbow and pulled her back. The vehicle shot past. Before he could even release her, the air snapped with energy. 3 guards materialized between them and the road, weapons humming. Lyriel's halo flared bright as a blade. "Identify threat vector," she ordered. "It's fine," Elias said quickly. "Just bad driving." Her gaze tracked the disappearing car with lethal focus. If harm had occurred. It didn't. She looked at his hand still around her arm. For a moment neither moved. Then he let go. Something unspoken lingered in the space between them. That evening, he submitted the dissolution request. It felt rational. Necessary. Terrifyingly overdue. He found her standing near the window when he returned, city lights reflecting in her eyes like distant constellations. "You filed a petition," she said without turning. "You knew? Your bureaucracies are not subtle." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, this situation isn't fair to you. You deserve a choice that isn't based on a translation glitch." "I am choosing," she replied. "Are you? Or are you following law?" She was silent long enough that he thought she might ignore the question. Then she faced him. "If you prefer termination, I will comply." Her voice was steady. Too steady. But the glow behind her shoulders dimmed, not the calm dimness from before, but something softer. Contained. He felt an unexpected twist in his chest. "You're not even mad?" he asked. "Aurelians do not display distress publicly. This isn't public." For a fraction of a second, her composure faltered. "I find your presence unusually affecting," she admitted. "However, union must be mutual." He hadn't realized how much he wanted her to argue, to protest. Instead, she simply accepted the possibility of walking away. Professional. Royal. Alone. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling while the city murmured outside. He told himself the petition was the right move. Cleaner. Simpler. Safer. So why did the thought of her leaving feel like something quietly collapsing? From the adjacent room he heard a faint sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. He pictured her sitting perfectly upright on the unfamiliar couch, probably still studying human relationship dynamics like a tactical manual. When did this stop being a joke? He muttered into the dark. And more unsettling still, why wasn't he sure he wanted it to end? The legal delegation arrived precisely at sunrise. Elias knew the exact moment because the royal transport hovering outside his residence blocked every ray of light like a judgmental cloud. He opened his door to find 6 Aurelians standing in symmetrical formation, each holding thin crystalline tablets that glowed with dense streams of text. Behind them stood Princess Lyriel, already composed, already alert, as if she had never required sleep in her life. "The marital treaty is ready for review," she said. "Please tell me that's a dramatic exaggeration. It is 912 pages." He stared at her. 900? What could you possibly need 900 pages for? I've signed apartment leases shorter than that. A union between sovereign bloodlines requires detail. One of the legal aides stepped forward and placed the tablet into his hands with ceremonial gravity. The screen scrolled endlessly. Clause 42. Lyriel continued. Addresses atmospheric preferences within shared sleeping environments. You negotiated the air? Incompatible oxygen density reduces rest quality. He swiped again. Genetic optimism projections? He read aloud. She nodded. Our analysts estimate offspring will display elevated resilience, adaptive cognition, and unusually symmetrical bone structure. He nearly dropped the tablet. Can we not discuss hypothetical children before breakfast? She tilted her head slightly. You are experiencing stress. Shall I postpone reproductive projections? Yes. Postpone them indefinitely. They moved into the main chamber where the legal aides arranged themselves like statues preparing to witness history. Elias sat across from Lyriel at the long table. She looked entirely at ease. He looked like a man seconds from attempting escape through a window. Before we proceed, he said, I need to ask you something without 12 witnesses recording it. She made a small gesture. The aides stepped back, their auditory sensors dimming. Privacy, apparently, still involved 6 silent observers. He leaned forward. Do you actually want this? Or is this just duty wrapped in elegant language? For the first time since he'd met her, Lyriel did not answer immediately. Her fingers rested lightly against the tabletop, perfectly still. When I was engineered, she said at last, my emotional thresholds were deliberately moderated. A future ruler must remain stable regardless of circumstance. Engineered, he repeated softly. Optimized, she corrected. Connection was never prioritized. Efficiency was. She met his gaze then, and there was something unguarded there, not fragile, but real. With you, I experience unscripted happiness. The words landed harder than any declaration he'd heard in a council chamber. He swallowed. That might be the most romantic sentence anyone has ever disguised as a lab report. A faint curve touched her mouth. I am still learning human expression. Before he could reply, one of the aides stepped forward. Princess, external communication from the Valorian Compact. Priority challenge. Lyriel's posture sharpened instantly. Display. A holographic figure shimmered into existence above the table, tall, scaled, and unmistakably displeased. Your Highness, the Valorian envoy said coolly, our government questions the legitimacy of this engagement. Humans are newly ascended. Emotional manipulation is not beyond them. Elias blinked. I'm sitting right here. The concern is strategic. The envoy continued. An impulsive marriage could destabilize power structures across 3 sectors. Lyriel's voice could have frozen oceans. I am not impulsive. Then demonstrate objectivity. Release the human and pursue a more suitable alliance. The implication hung in the air. Suitable meant powerful. Predictable. Not him. Elias felt every Aurelian guard in the room shift subtly, waiting. He could stay silent. Let royalty handle royalty. Instead, he stood. I didn't trap anyone, he said evenly. In fact, I filed to dissolve this engagement. Lyriel turned toward him, surprise flickering across her features. But let's get something clear, he continued. She chose this. And so did I, whether I understood it at the time or not. The envoy studied him. You would refuse advantage? We don't call it advantage, Elias said. We call it being with someone because it feels right. A pause. Then the hologram vanished. Challenge withdrawn. The chamber seemed to exhale. Lyriel rose slowly. You spoke without obligation, she said. That tends to be my style. Most species pursue proximity to power. Most humans don't trust anything they can't laugh with. Something bright shimmered behind her shoulders, warmer than before. Later, after the aides departed, they found themselves alone on the balcony overlooking the waking city. For a while neither spoke. Then Lyriel said quietly, I broke protocol intentionally. He turned. What? That note you passed me, it was not the first time I noticed you. Your expressions during prior councils were disruptive. Disruptive. You looked bored. No one looks bored before emperors. I was bored. I wished to understand that freedom. She rested her hands on the railing, watching traffic far below. When you made me laugh, it felt like stepping outside a structure I had inhabited my entire life. I did not wish to step back inside. The realization spread slowly through him. The laugh wasn't an accident. Neither is this. The city wind lifted a strand of her silver hair. Without thinking, he reached out and caught it before it brushed her eyes. They both went still. Closed now. Too close for diplomacy. If the law did not bind you, she asked softly, would you still choose me? The question threaded straight through his defenses. He should answer immediately. Instead, he found himself studying the details, the faint light along her skin, the way she watched him without calculation now, just hope held very carefully. Footsteps sounded inside. Guards returning. The moment fractured. Elias stepped back, clearing his throat. I don't know, he admitted. It was the most honest thing he had. She nodded once, accepting even that. But he noticed something new as she turned toward the doorway. For the first time since they'd met, Princess Lyriel Vietorin looked uncertain. And he realized, with a quiet jolt, that walking away might be far more difficult than staying. The dissolution ceremony was scheduled for midday, which Elias suspected was deliberate. It gave the galaxy maximum viewing hours. By the time his transport reached the Interstellar Council spire, news drones already circled like curious birds. Somewhere out there, analysts were probably discussing his emotional state with unnecessary graphics. He stepped onto the polished floor and tried to ignore the sensation that he was about to make the most important mistake of his life. Or prevent one. He hadn't decided which. Inside the chamber, representatives from a dozen civilizations filled the curved tiers. What had once been the site of a diplomatic laugh was now arranged for something far quieter, the legal unbinding of a royal engagement. Princess Lyriel stood near the center dais, luminous and composed, dressed in formal Aurelian white threaded with faint strands of silver light that shifted as she moved. Her expression revealed nothing, but he had learned enough now to recognize the effort behind that stillness. A single tablet rested on the pedestal between them. One touch, and the union would vanish as if it had never existed. Clean. Efficient. Forgettable. High Chancellor Serath inclined his head as Elias approached. Commander Ward, you retain the right to withdraw your claim without penalty. The Imperium honors voluntary bonds above compelled ones. Voluntary. The word echoed unpleasantly. Elias glanced toward Lyriel. She met his gaze without flinching. No plea. No expectation. Just acceptance. That somehow made it worse. Proceed, Serath said gently. Elias picked up the tablet. It felt absurdly light for something capable of altering the trajectory of two lives, possibly two civilizations. He told himself this was logical. Their engagement had begun with a mistranslation and a joke delivered during terminal boredom. Relationships were not supposed to start like that. Yet his mind betrayed him, replaying memories with irritating clarity. Her first stunned laugh. The way she tried tacos like a scientist discovering fire. Her fierce command when she thought he was in danger. The quiet confession on the balcony, unscripted happiness. He remembered the schedule she'd made for romance and how, days later, she'd stopped checking it quite so often. Remembered how she stood closer now without noticing. Remembered that she had broken protocol not out of recklessness, but because, for once, she wanted something unplanned. Commander, Serath prompted. Elias became aware that several hundred beings were waiting. He looked back down at the tablet. Freedom was one touch away. So why did it feel like loss? Across from him, Lyriel spoke softly, meant only for him. You are not responsible for my disappointment. He blinked. You're disappointed? Aurelian training does not eliminate preference, she said. But preference must not become obligation. Even now she was protecting his choice. Something in his chest tightened sharply. Is that how you see this? He asked. An obligation? I see it as improbable, she replied. And valued. The faint glow behind her shoulders trembled, not bright, not dim, but alive. He thought of the rival envoy questioning her autonomy, assuming she'd been manipulated. Thought of how quickly she had stood beside him anyway. Thought of how, somewhere along the way, the absurdity had stopped being the defining feature of this story. And she had. He set the tablet back onto the pedestal. Serath lifted a hand. You may finalize. I withdraw the request, Elias said. The chamber fell so silent it felt suspended outside time. The Chancellor blinked, an impressive breach of composure for an Aurelian. You withdraw the dissolution? Elias nodded, then looked straight at Lyriel. Not because of the law, he said, voice carrying farther than he intended. Not because of a translator glitch, or a diplomatic accident. He drew a steady breath. Because I choose her. For the first time since he had known her, Princess Lyriel lost control of her expression. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. Her eyes widened a fraction. The luminous field behind her flared bright as sunrise before settling into a warm, steady radiance the color of molten silver. You choose unscripted? She asked quietly. I do. A murmur rippled through the chamber, astonishment translated into 100 frequencies. Serath inclined his head deeply. Then let it be recorded, this union stands not as restitution, but as mutual selection. Lyriel stepped closer. Closer than protocol allowed. Close enough that he could see the tiny shifts in her breathing. You altered the outcome, she said. Humans do that. She studied him for a long moment, then leaned in just enough that her next words belonged only to him. Unscripted again? He smiled. You're getting good at it. From somewhere behind them came the faint sound of a device chiming. Lyriel glanced down at her tablet. He groaned. Please don't tell me you're updating the schedule. I am. She tapped once, then turned the screen toward him. Where 47 meticulously planned points had once lived, there was now only a single line. Improvisation. He laughed, relief breaking through him like sunlight. I can work with that. As the council formally acknowledged their bond, Elias became dimly aware that history was being written in real time. Commentators would analyze political implications. Strategists would debate the balance of power. But none of that felt particularly important at the moment. Lyriel extended her hand, not ceremonially, just simply. He took it. Her fingers tightened with surprising warmth. Be advised, she said, voice low with something almost playful. Aurelians commit completely. Good, he replied. So do humans. Outside the vast windows, ships traced bright paths across the atmosphere, carrying news of the decision outward in widening circles. For decades, the galaxy had measured humanity by its technology, its stubborn resilience, its talent for surviving the impossible. Now it would remember something else. That an empire had not been won through conquest or strategy, but through a laugh, a choice, and a human who proved that the strongest bonds were never the ones written by law. They were the ones freely chosen.